In the advent of countless geopolitical problems and issues in the 20th century, many Muslims found themselves fleeing their countries and moving towards Western countries and non-predominantly Islamic countries. That led to many thinking and asserting opinions of the likes such as, are we allowed to live under non-Muslim countries, governments, and societies? Are we as Muslims given permission from the heavens, the divine, the Holy Quran, our leaders, the Prophet, and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt to live under a society that does not necessarily adhere to my worldview and my beliefs? The first thing to make clear is that, like us, many examples came before where we had Muslims who had to flee their predominantly Muslim countries in order to seek refuge and a society that would honor their needs, as well as personalities who are representative of that divine call, prophets of God and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. No one can forget the legendary story of Prophet Joseph, who forcefully left his country and went to another nation and settled there, ultimately making it a home for him and becoming a political leader, minister of agriculture for that matter, and leading that society to goodness. And if we look into the examples given by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, we find similar cases. The fact of the matter is, most of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt lived under a society that was a quote-unquote kafir government, or at the helm of that society was the enemy of Allah. Whether it was your Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan's, Yazid ibn Muawiyah's, Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi's, Harun, Al-Abbasi, Ma'mun, our Imams of Ahlul Bayt dealt with these circumstances. Now, in today's situation, we, for the most part, are blessed not to live under a Muawiyah, nor under a Yazid, nor under Al-Hajjaj. Although, unfortunately, in the last half a century, we saw horrible dictators and ruthless leaders that reminded us of those times that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt had to go through, whether these were in Iraq, whether these were in other societies. That being said, we had to leave our predominantly Islamic nations and live in societies and environments that are not necessarily practicing our worldview. Is there an issue in that regard? As mentioned, when we look into the lives of the Imams, we get an example from the likes of Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida, alayhi salam. We see Imam al-Rida in a society that is not necessarily his Islamic society, although they might claim to be an Islamic society. Yet he makes the best from it, and he makes it suitable for Muslims to reside in and participate and contribute in such a society. By being a leader of that society, by showing the non-Muslim, whether they were the Zoroastrians, because we're talking modern day Mashhad, then Tus, Khurasan, when Imam al-Rida was taken by al-Ma'mun al-Abbasi to live in that distant land, he would interact and engage and speak and have civil discourse and dialogue with those around him, respecting those rules as well and honoring them necessary. Likewise, today, brothers and sisters, we might have had this brought upon us, where we were forced to go somewhere, or even deliberately leave to pursue a better lifestyle. Allah wants from us ease and does not want for us difficulty. If we can maintain our principles and our values, and we are not disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in so doing, we are spreading the good word, the good image, the good reality of what Islam truly is, as many people have a fabricated reality of what Islam is, then there's more power to you by doing so. There is a concept that has to be taken into consideration. A matter found in Islamic jurisprudence, at-ta'arrub ba'd al-hijrah, when one engaged in what is referred to as at-ta'arrub after they had performed migration and immigrated somewhere. Normally, such a concept is found in areas of fasting, You are not to go to a location that will jeopardize your ability to fast or pray or don your appropriate attire, whether it is the hijab or the attire necessary for the men. These are societies we cannot go to. We cannot live in. Why? Because they will jeopardize our values and principles. Keeping this in mind, the term at-ta'arrub comes from the word i'rabi. The i'rabi is different from the Arabi. At the time, in the context of the 7th century Arabian Peninsula, the Arabi was seen as the Bedouin that was uneducated. And this individual would freely live his or her life without fear of ramifications or consequences. Now, a ta'arrub would be I living that lifestyle, no fear of consequences or ramifications, however I want to live, after I have traveled somewhere else. That is not something we can adopt, obviously, because we have to consider our morals and principles as Muslims. We are Muslims at the end of the day. Whether we are Iraqi Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, or American Muslims, we're Muslims at the end of the day. We will not jeopardize our values, our incumbent obligated upon us values. We see ourselves living in a society where our values are not compromised. Our principles are not at jeopardy. In addition to that, we use the benefits and blessings of our relative societies to help put a good image of Islam Ahlul Bayt, to allow those who, when they see or look up Islam, they see violence and tyranny and terror, then when they see my example or your example or any other decent law-abiding Muslim example, they get the better understanding. They get the reality of what Islam is. How would that happen if you're not around to share that message? Whether you are compelled, whether you are forced to travel and immigrate and migrate, or whether you voluntarily left that predominantly Muslim environment to pursue whether this was an education or a business opportunity, you maintain your principles. And the principles of Islam in regards to immigration and migration is to abide by the rules of a society so long as your values are protected, your principles are not at stake, and to help share the name of Islam in a proper manner. We have that blessing today. Some might consider, well, I am not allowed to live, I don't feel that I am allowed to live under a leader or a system that is not an Islamic system. Let's even meet that argument halfway. First of all, in the case of whether this is the United States, North America, South America, the UK, Australia, whatever continent, mainly, there's a huge recognition of God. In God we trust. Sure, maybe the practice is not necessarily found, but the acknowledgement is there or not. It definitely is. Albeit, there are societies that are Western societies that will prevent you from practicing your values, that will prevent you from believing and accepting your own principles and putting them to action, such as either donning the headscarf, such as when it's time for prayer, you are not given the opportunity to pray, such as being deprived from halal food that should normally fall within your right to have and be accessible to. If that's the case, then that would fall into this principle of at-ta'arruf ba'd al-hijrah. Why would you voluntarily walk into a circumstance that is not for your own good, that is not for your own benefit, that will affect your own faith? If there was a necessity, definitely, if there was a need, if this was important for you to go to a certain location, then that would be an exception. There was a very important need. But if you're just willingly going to walk into an area that you know for sure you will not be able to practice your values due to fear, then obviously then you have to hold that faith away. You have to not show that faith. You would have to conceal your faith. And how many examples do we have where Allah recognizes that there are times you have to conceal your faith out of fear of backlash, for example? Faith in which sense? Faith in the matter that outwardly you would not necessarily fall into a particular group. Does that mean I do not adhere to my Islamic attire? No, not at all. Islamic attire is a red line because it's not just Islamic attire, it's human behavior. If I find myself in an area where I am not allowed to act in my inalienable human rights, then why on earth would I want to maintain myself in such a circumstance? Therefore, are we allowed to live under non-Islamic governments? sometimes we might not even realize it. That the very famous quote, in the West I saw Islam, but I didn't see Muslims. And in the East I saw Muslims, but I didn't see Islam. Sometimes we realize that we have been given an Islamic opportunity depending on where we went in the West. Is freedom of speech not an Islamic opportunity? Is the freedom to practice and believe what you want not an Islamic opportunity? Is the freedom to pursue your dream and be liberated in whatever passion you have, given morality and decent ethics, not an Islamic opportunity? We find these being at the forefront of the declarations that are presented as values we take when we are living in the West, and even areas of Asia and in the East, and so on and so forth. Yes, we are allowed to live under these circumstances, given that our principles are not jeopardized, barring whatever other worldview or school of thought has to say. In Islam, Ahlul Bayt, we do so, but we make sure we represent ourselves in the best way possible.